Thank you. Assembly Member Garbutt.
Thank you. I want to talk a bit about how the decision-making is made around the number of officers deployed to police protest. So, obviously, we speak here a lot about choices, and you've used the phrase a couple of times here already around the tough choices that's made. So I just wondered what risk assessment is made in terms of policing protests in the city, specifically in use of time, specifically around the Defend Our Juries protest, because we've seen the same people holding similar signs in Truro, where Devon and Cornwall police made the decision not to arrest anyone. So just wondering why we've seen that disparity between here and other places around the country.
I'm not going to speak for other forces. If people are choosing to break terrorism legislation, they should get arrested. So the Defend Our Juries events are... So it's all based on the intelligence beforehand. How big is it going to be? How volatile is it going to be? What's the likelihood of offending? And you're resourcing against your anticipation of that. Our ability to predict is quite good, but we don't always get it right. I mean, the Unite the Kingdom event was a lot bigger than we anticipated, and bigger than previous events organised by the same people, and more volatile than the previous 2 or 3 events as well. So that was challenging. In terms of the Defend Our Juries and the sort of terrorist defending in support of a prescribed terrorist group, Palestine Action, it's very obvious beforehand what their intention is. So we resource against that intention. So it's a big demand, but the planning of that is fairly straightforward. We're also not just resourcing to deal with people who are looking to get arrested for expressing support. We've also seen smaller groups around them looking to get into conflict and violence. So groups such as Youth Demand associated with it. So that's also affected the resourcing picture.
So, in terms of, do you agree that it's a choice being made in terms of, and is there an operational order to arrest people holding the signs as part of the Defend Our Juries? Because it just is interesting that in other places they haven't made that same decision.
In the vast majority of places they have done. There'll always be a surprise moment where maybe a force isn't actually prepared for it or ready for it because of resources, and then they'll follow up and do a reactive investigation on the back of it. So even in those cases, there will be follow-up investigations. But it is a significant offence supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation, and therefore we've made the decision that we have to follow through on that. Otherwise, there's no point having terrorist legislation if you're going to ignore some of the offending around it.
So then, in terms of in terms of what you were saying about risk, so you said about volume and then violence. Yes. What was the second one? What was the second?
This was my sort of paraphrasing it. Obviously, how big something is affects how much you might need to put around it. How volatile it is. So is it likely to be disorderly or not, or with particular intent on violence? Thirdly, sort of any other intelligence about intents to break the law, because like the Palestine Action one. But there are other factors in this as well, like counter-protests and what that might generate, and what other events are nearby, and what other sort of collisions between events are possible.
Have you reviewed it for the large Palestine Solidarity campaigns, the coalition ones? Have you been constantly reviewing it in terms of those criteria?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I haven't looked at the numbers, but I'd be confident the scale of the resources associated with those has gone down over time as they've got more routine and less volatile. In the first few months, each of those Palestine Solidarity campaigns tended to have tens of arrests for violence and or support of Hamas and Hezbollah. That has tended to subside over the last couple of years, and so that has affected our resourcing of it. Because
I think that needs to be. And then just quickly on conditions, do you have any comments on the proportionality of conditions used for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign marches? In the specific condition that I'm interested in is the one where the Met conditioned that they weren't allowed to use percussive and drum instruments because it would disrupt business, but they were planning to hold a protest on a Friday at 6 p.m. on a bank holiday. So I just wondered how that decision was made.
This might sound good, but last time I checked, London was a 24/7 city. We have put conditions on Palestine Solidarity Campaign particularly based on two issues of communities. So we have two powers to put conditions on. One is fear of violence. The second one is serious disruption to the life of the community. Those are the two criteria upon which we might then put conditions on. With Palestine Solidarity Campaign, it's largely been about serious disruption to the life of the community. And the two communities we've tended to take most account of have been the Jewish communities, which has affected routes, and given they're doing most of their marches on Saturday, a day of religious observance for Jewish communities, keeping them away from synagogues, etc. And secondly, business communities. And so we've been particularly insistent on issues like varying the route so the same businesses aren't affected every second week and things like that. So we've taken account of both of those to use our powers.
It was actually more specifically about that one on Bank Holiday Friday, but yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
OK, Commissioner, the Met reported, and I quote, officers policing the Defend Our Juries protest in Parliament Square have been subjected to an exceptional level of abuse, including punches, kicks, spitting and objects being thrown, in addition to verbal abuse. Palestinian Action, Just Stop Oil and Extension Rebellion are civil disobedience campaigns designed, actually, to cause as much disruption as possible. And a Defend Our Juries organisers noted that putting pressure on the police resources is part of their political strategy. So given that, would you consider trying to recuperate some of the costs from these organisers? We're talking about losing our front counters, and you can sense how upset we all are on behalf of Londoners over that. The amount of money that's going into this when they're doing this on purpose. What are the chances of getting any money back from these illegal demonstrations?
Frankly, none. I mean, there is no provision in law to charge sort of protesters or criminal protesters with the cost of policing those events.
Because, like you, I suspect, I'm just concerned it's going to get worse and worse. One of the things that I have witnessed, I mean, I had never been to one of these marches until the summer when I went with the Pink Ladies. There was no problem with them whatsoever until some men turned up with masks. They're always the ones with masks, and they're the ones that started chanting things against the police. And if you look at counter demonstrations sometimes, the ones that are causing trouble are the ones wearing masks. Are we able to do something to insist that anybody that goes on these campaigns or marches do not wear masks so they can be identified?
There are powers, Section 60AA of Public Order, I think it is, to make an order telling people to remove masks, and those are used in those situations. And if people don't remove them, then they can be arrested.
Well, I think there's also provision for not having flares, and they're used as well. I do think the general public would be much happier to see some of these things stopped, and they don't want to see signs calling for intifadadas, and they don't want to hear from the river to the sea screamed out either. And I just think it's getting worse and worse, and it's costing us all more and more.
So I'm troubled by some of the language and its effect on communities, and the sense that language in different process conveys sort of racism in various directions. But these phrases, and we've tested them multiple times with the CPS and with Independent Counsel, and they are such complex historical, cultural roots to them that they're not sufficiently black and white in their meaning to merit to be able to prosecute criminally. Now that I'm not saying that's ideal, but that's the situation. And I sort of realise that sort of some of these events and some of this language that can land very heavily on communities. Obviously, you saw after the terrorist attack in Manchester. We asked the Defend Our Juries campaign to sort of to show a bit of respect and not to protest on the Saturday, given the sort of Jewish community was in mourning on the back of that attack. I was grateful for political support from multiple sides on that point. Helpfully, I think it was a smaller protest than it would otherwise have been, but we still had best part of 500 people turned out to support a prescribed terrorist act group, organisation, Palestine Action Group, which is deeply disappointing, and it's entirely understandable when you hear Jewish communities talk about the effect that has on them.
Well, that's right. They are frightened to come into London. The Jewish community feel very badly about this, quite rightfully, and to them, from the river to the sea, there's no ambiguity there. They know exactly what that means, and it upsets, quite rightfully, all of them when they hear it. Because of time reasons, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
I'm grateful, Assembly Member Hall. Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you for those answers, Commissioner. Just touching on post-event investigation regarding these protests, what additional demands and idea of costs is the post-event investigation, or the charging, the processing, all of this thing of these people who are being arrested?
It has a very significant effect. Thank you, Councillor Roberts. It has so in an ideal world, we arrest somebody and charge them on the day, and then there's some paperwork and issues to follow up, which is not enormous. We've got two different sort of groups of two different examples I could use on post-event investigations. So the United Kingdom event, where we had tens of people showing extreme violence, throwing things at officers. We arrested tens, I can't remember the exact number, but the majority we weren't able to arrest because it was such a difficult conflict. It was more about defending officers and containing the issue than it was making arrests. So in that situation, it's about video evidence and appeals to identify who the offenders are. We've done 2 appeals so far that's appealing for tens of individuals. I think we've arrested some of them, and there's more to do there. So that's quite a long, complex investigation, a lot of resourcing considerations. The second example would be the Palestine Action Group support and the Defend Our Juries events, where we've now got about 2,000 people pending, most of them pending prosecution decisions by the Attorney General. Some of them are on the way towards him, some of them we're still doing the files. Those files are not the most complex, even though they're terrorist support, but 2,000 of them is an awful lot of work. That's a big burden for our counter-terrorism teams, a big burden for our public order team, and a big burden for CPS. And the courts are indicating multiple long trials next year. So I'm concerned that the justice system isn't moving quickly enough to show that it's taking this seriously.
Okay, thank you. And just one other question is based on the training that officers get when they're dealing with these large-scale protests. It's a question about the training of nuance, of how people are approached. So I know you can't comment on individual cases, but there was a fairly high-profile person said, I oppose the prescription of Palestine Action. Not saying I support, but I oppose the prescription. And that person was seen being dealt with by the police. Now, that's a nuanced case. Does nuance ever play a part, and should nuance ever play a part?
It definitely does. Of course, when people are playing games with the law and trying to step right up to the line and sort of then it's not impossible to make mistakes, but we've been talking this through with officers, and of course as the protesters' tactics change, if we learn something from one week the next. I mean, there were people at one stage using, some of them had placards saying I support Palestine Action, to sort of hoping officers didn't read it properly and made an assumption. So there's been some silly games played, and of course under pressure sometimes officers might get that slightly wrong, but every sort of event we're always learning from the past ones and the sort of some of the games that some of these protesters are playing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Onto the new powers that are currently being looked at in Parliament. What impact would those have on policing protests in London, and would you as the Met be prepared to make use of those new powers that are being looked at in Parliament?
So are you referring to the recent comments by the Home Secretary?
Yes.
So she's considering, I think, what sort of review and what she wants to look at. So until I know precisely what she's thinking or what that review says. I think I'm sort of guessing and making things up, so I don't think I can answer that.
I mean, one of the discussions, for example, would be looking at more powers to prevent a protest from occurring. Are there further powers in that area that you think would be useful? And I suppose I would add that are actually operational. If you've got 10,000 people, it's very hard to tell them all to go home without creating a situation if they don't want to.
Yeah, so clearly the Home Secretary is troubled by the fact of the cumulative impact on communities, which we can all see the effect of that, and entirely makes sense. If new proposals come forward, then of course we'll have a conversation with the Home Office about the practicality of them and sort of what is and isn't operationally achievable. I think that sometimes we will say to government, we think this bit of the law doesn't work. And, for example, we had this recently with knife crime where the zombie knife legislation didn't work. I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to do that on something which is as fundamental and political as the balance about how much protest takes place with the right to ban it. That's not for us to have a view on other than the practicality of a policy. That's for government and eventually Parliament to decide on that balance. If I express a view on, protest law should be more permissive or more restrictive, I think I'm overstepping my responsibilities.
Okay, no, that's fair. Some of the other powers suggested were things like abilities to target specific individuals who are sort of repeat protesters, if you like, frequent flyers, to specifically prohibit them, without doing something about a wider protest. Would that be a useful power?
I'm not going to be drawn on.
You don't want to get drawn into any of that.
See more of it.
Okay, so onto the guidance. College of Policing guidance on protesting. Do you think that's adequate and correct? Is there anything else that needs looking at within that College of Policing guidance?
It's not a challenging issue for us. I mean, their guidance reflects the national approaches and the tactics that they've built over a period of time, and the constantly changing area of law. So it's not a restrictive or problematic document at all. It's a helpful, compendium of everything we've learned.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.